All right. Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants event. My name is Joe Browski, and I'll be your host for today. And of course, I want to continue wishing everybody a happy World Ocean Week. So June 8th was World Ocean Day, but we celebrate all week long here at Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants. We're hosting about 20 events with ocean scientists and explorers from all over the world. As many of you know, our oceans are in trouble. All kinds of reasons, from overfishing to climate change, to the pollution and plastics that make their way into the ocean systems. But there's lots of hope. The ocean is resilient, and if we give it space, it can recover. So really excited to be continuing our events today. We're rolling along with a great event with Alicia McArdle joining us today. She's joining us from Australia. She's the Marine Conservation Program Manager for Mars Sustainable Solutions team. She's been working on their coral reef restoration program based in Cairns, Australia. Prior to this, she was working on Kangaroo Island as a marine biologist. In 2016, she was officer in charge of marine biosecurity for Northern Australia. Alicia spends approximately 50% of her year abroad in Indonesia in tropical waters, rebuilding coral reef systems. Wow, that makes me incredibly jealous here in Canada. We've got good diving here, but it's cold water. But half the year in Indonesia sounds pretty special. How are you doing today,
It is
Alicia?
very special. I'm pretty lucky.
All right, absolutely. Well, first of all, a huge shout out and a huge thank you for staying up a little bit later for us tonight out in Australia. We're excited to have you with us today. We're excited to get to know you a little bit better. And it's definitely one of my favorite subjects, coral reefs, and how we can protect them. So if you're ready, Alicia, we'd love to learn a little bit more about the work you get to do.
Awesome. Thanks, everyone. Thanks for joining, and welcome to listening to this talk about coral reef restoration. As Joe said, my name's Alicia. I work in Cairns, and I'm just going to give you a bit of an overview about myself, how I became a marine biologist and in this role, and then we'll talk a little bit about the coral reef restoration program that I'm very proud to be part of, and we can go from there with some questions. So let's just take it away. So I know this is just a title screen, but I just wanted to highlight the fact that this reef that you can see here is actually a restored reef. And so it's very, very spectacular and amazing. And it's one of the only reefs that I would have ever been to, and I've been to quite a few, that you consider that it's almost 100% coral cover. So all you can see there is just coral. There's no bits of sand or rock or anything. It's just covered in coral, and it's pretty amazing to see. So all I want to say at this point is that there actually is hope. I mean, a lot of people sometimes say that, you know, oh, the ocean's dying, we're doing the wrong thing. Yes, you know, humans do have an impact with the oceans, but there is hope there as well. And so that's what I'm here to talk about today. About me, my name's Alicia. I work for Mars Sustainable Solutions. So Mars, the chocolate bar company that everyone knows and might love. I've got a map of the world on the screen for you to show you exactly where I am. So I'm over in Australia. I grew up where the little blue line is, and I currently live where the pink line is. So not much further away, about 1,600 kilometres. And I'm living in an area called Cairns, which is the gateway to the Great Barrier Reef. So I'm pretty lucky to be in this spot of the world. So I grew up in Brisbane, and when I was in Brisbane on my school holidays, I'd go to work with my dad. And my dad used to work a lot on yachts and motorboats and those sorts of things, and marinas. And so on my school holidays, I'd end up just sitting in marinas most of the time. And they'd never find me on the boat, but actually usually down in the mud flats, getting really dirty and messy and trying to catch crabs, or with laying on my stomach over the pontoons, looking at the sea squirts and wondering what different animals were living underneath there. And I think that's pretty much where I started the idea of becoming a marine biologist. I then grew up a little bit older, and we got the opportunity to go to SeaWorld. And of course, I wanted to become a dolphin trainer like half of the world. And then was able to go and visit the Great Barrier Reef on a family holiday when I was about 12 or 13. And then I sort of just fell in love with reefs. So I'm pretty lucky to be now back in that job where I get to work on coral reefs every day. But it didn't just happen like that. It does take a little bit of time to get there. So I went and did my undergraduate degree at university. I went and got my diving certificate, And I then did some work in grad school going to Indonesia to look at turtles. So I looked at watching the little baby turtles that you can see on that picture there, and I was watching them swim out over the first 50 meters of their new lives out in the ocean, and got to see where they went and how the waves affected them. So it was a pretty cool opportunity to go over there, and then also work with the local communities over there in the fisheries, which is where that pretty picture behind me came from all those years ago. From there, I decided that I was going to become work in tourism. So on those photos on the left, I was working in the Whitsundays, where Joe's also been in previous life. And I took people out to the reef and showed them the reef. And also I worked in an aquarium for a little while. And as much as that's really good fun and you get to play with some really cool animals, such as otters, is what I've got sitting on my shoulder there. I got a little bit bored about saying the same things to different people, and I wanted to see something different and make a change in people's lives. And although I felt that I was doing that in a way by talking to people, I wanted to actually be a bit more hands-on. So in a weird way, I then moved into a completely different professional career in waste management. So pretty much working in garbage and rubbish and recycling. And in that role, I still always brought it back to how oceans affected us. So for example, when you litter at school or on the street, how the drains run down into the rivers, into the creeks and into the ocean still could affect everyone. And so it was a really, really interesting part of my career. I really enjoyed it. Really dirty, but really interesting also to see how everyone looks at rubbish and what people recycle and how we can change that for the future. I also worked in an area of creek rehabilitation. So as part of that, we were planting trees and helping restore creeks to make it healthier for the environment. And so I was fortunate enough to also work with a lot of school groups and teach kids about the invertebrates that live in our creeks and catch them and see what species they are and work out how healthy our creeks and river systems were. So we've always been trying to get back into the water. And then a few years ago, I happened to get a very, very cool job on a little island off the southern coast of Australia called Kangaroo Island, where I was the scientific officer there. And that was amazing because it gave me the opportunity to still talk to people about the environment and recycling, but then also about the marine environment, but then also get back to my passion, which was about oceans. And so there I was able to work on temperate reefs, which are a little bit different to the coral reefs I work on now. Seals, penguins, all sorts of things. So it's very, very cool. Before this current job that I'm in, I also worked, as Joe said, up in Northern Australia on marine pests, which is also completely different. And so that's those things that grow on ships that you can sometimes see, and they're the little nasties that travel all around the world and then grow in other places and take them over. So part of my job was to train other people, what we call the first responders out there, so the rangers and the Indigenous rangers across Northern Australia, to look out for these things and make sure if something does come into Australia that we know about it and we can get rid of them before they start taking hold in our oceans. Then I was lucky enough to get my current role, which was with Mars. And so my current role now is about restoring reefs, not only here in Australia, but around the world. And it's also about training people. So I still get to use that training part of my career, where I get to train adults and a lot of rangers and other students as well, in how to undertake reef restoration from start to finish. So I now just get to do what I used to do in a coral reef in a beautiful area of the world. So before I finish that part, I just wanted to say, if you always wanted to be a marine biologist or you're considering it, there are definitely lots of different options as well for you. So you don't necessarily have to all become dolphin trainers or work on coral reefs. There are so many different areas of the marine environment that you can work on. And even if you don't work on coral reefs, you can still help with the marine environment by doing other things, such as, for example, when I worked in that waste management area. So as I said before, I work for Mars, the chocolate bar company, but we're not just all chocolate. We also work in a whole range of different brands. And so if you have a pet, you might notice some of the brands that you might have in your cupboard there, that's such as Whiskers or Sheba or Pedigree that you might feed your dog. And then we also do things such as Mars bars, which everyone might know, Snickers bars, and chewing gum, such as Extra, Wrigley's. So there's a whole range of different brands that Mars has. It's quite a big company. Some of your favorite brands might be in there. But the idea is that the fact is all these different brands that we use raw materials to make them. So raw materials are those things that we get from the oceans, from the ground, from the trees that help make us these products. Because we're a family business, we also want to make sure that we actually have a business into the future as well. And so when we're using these things, we want to make sure it's sustainable. So it means it can be used long-term into generations to come, not just for the business, but also for the humankind and for the earth, to make sure that we're able to be a sustainable population. So for example, we can see here on the right-hand side, we've got cocoa, which is cocoa that comes from the trees, which makes you Mars bars. And then on the left, you've got some fish, which is what we might use to make some cat food, for example. So why would we look after the oceans? We can see the world map here, and you can see that there's a lot of ocean. And a lot of people talk about different oceans, such as the Pacific Ocean or the Atlantic Ocean or the Indian Ocean. Guess what? It's all connected, which means it really is just one big ocean, and it affects so many parts of our lives that we might not necessarily think about. Like, for example, it controls all of our weather systems. It's responsible for a lot of our air that we breathe. So it's about not only just looking after your own small patch, but what you do in your own small patch does affect everyone else around the rest of the world as well. The other part about the ocean, which I thought was really cool. So one of the ladies that we work with as a colleague within Mars, Dr. Michelle Taylor, she gave me this slide. She said to me that we know more about we have mapped more of Venus than we have mapped under the ocean, which is huge. So there's such a small amount of information that we know about the ocean, which we could try and work on as well. So what have we developed and why is it important to us? We've developed this system called the Mars Assisted Reef Restoration System. There's pictures on the left. I've got one here in my hand, a very small one. These things are called reef stars. So they're literally pieces of iron rebar or steel. So steel that has then been covered in sand and resin. And this is what we use to attach coral pieces to, which you can see on the right-hand side. And we build these, we slot these in together. I've got two here. You slot them in together and make a reef. They're simple, they're easy, they're cheap, and they're really, really clever. The reason we made them was because we have a lot of work that we do in Indonesia. So for example, we have a chocolate factory in a place called Makassar in Indonesia, and we have a lot of cocoa farmers that rely on fish to survive. And so we noticed that the reefs around the island of Sulawesi had degraded a lot. And so why can't we restore a reef? Let's see what we can do. And it happened to work out really well that one of the guys who worked in the chocolate factory was retiring and happened to be a really strong scuba diver and an engineer. So he was able to develop this system, and we went out and trialed it with the local community, and this is what we've come out with. That was 13 years ago. So we've been perfecting this over a while, and now we're at this point where we're able to take it across the world, which is really exciting. This is why we've built these things, these reef stars, because we've got so many areas across the world that have this sort of rubble dominated environment in the water. This is some footage of what it looks like in Indonesia. And the reason for that is from blast fishing. So that's when people have been using dynamite to be able to catch the fish. And this happened 30 years ago. So quite a long time ago, when the people on the islands didn't really understand what impact they were going to be having on their local reef. As you can see, it hasn't recovered. You've got little bits of coral here and there, but other than that, it is no way that that is going to look after itself and grow back into a coral reef. The other reason is that this could also be in Australia, or it could be in Mexico, or it could be in the Caribbean. There are other reasons that we can have these rubble fields as well. It could be from storms or cyclones, hurricanes. It could be from coral bleaching. So for example, when corals bleach and they end up dying and it's a catastrophic bleaching, they'll break down, algae will grow over and they will fall apart and into this rubble. The other one is from boat strikes. So for example, if a ship comes along and doesn't see the reef and hits the reef, it can actually crush that whole reef into rubble like what you see here. So we need to have some ideas about how we can help fix these sorts of areas. The other reason is for the community. So it's the human side. These people here on the island, for example, these children that you can see on the jetty here, they haven't fished on their islands for 30 years. So it's about having food security and also having an alternate income. So if we're able to restore the reefs for these people here, it means that the less of them have to go out fishing and they could potentially then use their reef for tourism. How does it work? This is a lovely little video that will show you exactly how we do this. So this is a local community that build the reef stars for us. So as you can see, they're putting the sand on the reef stars. And then they go over to the island and we have the local community help us. So they help us tie the coral on for us. You can see here all the local community working together. And we do actually tie them on with cable ties, and I'll come back to that in a second of the reasons why we do that. We then have a small team of divers and snorkelers that come from the local university. They come out with us and they help us build the reef. So as you can see here, we're stacking up the reef stars and then we snorkel them down to the area that we want to restore. So as you can see in this part, for example, there is still some healthy reef there. And we don't want to grow up, we don't want to put the reef stars over that. We want to actually build around it, as you can see with the diver here. So if you have a look at it at the moment, it kind of looks a little bit like a web. And that's what we're trying to achieve. We're trying to achieve almost like a web over the areas of the rubble that we were talking about before, leaving that healthy coral intact. And that's what it looks like after one day. So it's really, really quick process. We have around 30 people on the island that will help tie the coral on in one morning, and they will do around 250 reef stars, and we'll then be able to put those whole 250 in with around 6 to 7 people in one day. As I said before, it looks a little bit like a web, and so when we originally built these the reef stars, they're actually called spiders because they kind of look a bit like a spider. But we were told that a lot of people didn't like the idea that they only had 6 legs. Spiders are supposed to have 8. And then also people don't like spiders, they get scared by them. So which is why we changed it into a reef star. We have a lovely pretty star instead. But it does go with the whole idea of it being a web underwater. So you can see from this picture here, there are the reef stars and the little pieces of coral attached to it. And they're all interwoven together, and that makes it a really, really strong structure for the coral. And it also means that it will withstand quite large storms as well. This is what the same spot looks like after 12 months. So it's pretty amazing. We're quite lucky because Indonesia is in a place called the Coral Triangle. It's an area of biodiversity for the coral, and it seems to grow a lot quicker than other places. So for example, here, this coral growth that you're seeing isn't necessarily what we're going to see elsewhere. And so that's why it's really important for us to trial it in the places. You can see that the fish are in and out and swimming around, and you can see that even as we're putting the reef stars in, they come in and around and want to know what's going on and come into that new environment. This spot is a spot which is 4 to 5 years old. So you can hardly see it. That's my colleague there, Noel, showing you the areas of where all the reef stars are. And you can almost see them in this shot here on the left-hand side. You might be able to see part of a reef star. And so as you can see, the whole place has completely recovered. And it's quite an interesting way that we think has happened here, is because when the reef holds down the rubble, the natural coral can come in and grow as well, and it then helps restore itself. So the reason I mentioned the cable ties a little bit earlier was that because of the photo on the left-hand side. So that's a coral that we attached with cable ties, which you might just be able to see on the right-hand side of it. That's a coral that's 2 months old. And so the coral actually envelops the cable tie. Now, it is a bit of an issue, the fact that we have to use plastic. We're trying to actually start using biodegradable cable ties. So that's a trial that we've started using, with the idea that it will break down and then we won't have to worry about the plastic. But the idea with the fact that we're using plastic is because we don't really have much of an option at the moment. And hopefully there are some of you out there that are great plastics engineers and they can look at a different option for us, because we need something that can hold those corals down for about a year. We want them to be strong enough that they're going to grow completely around that piece of steel, and then they'll be strong enough to look after themselves. But until now, we haven't got any other options, and so that's why we're looking for those biodegradable ones. On the right-hand side, you can see one of the reef stars in the background. And that's just to show you the fact that it highlights the fact that corals need somewhere stable for them to grow. So when they're in the rubble, they move around a lot. They can't attach to anything, but if you attach them to something hard, that helps them grow a lot quicker and a lot happier. You're also moving them up out of where it's all really mucky in the bottom. So you're sort of elevating them a little bit. And that makes them be able to access the nutrients in the water a lot easier. It means that there's more light as well. And it gives them some what we call structural complexity. So that means that when you've got the reef star, water is allowed to move underneath it, and it allows those natural corals to come and colonize and help grow up as a natural reef. How much reef have we actually built? Well, actually, it's close to 4 hectares, which is the equivalent of 4 of these. It's one of the largest reef restoration sites in the world, what we have in Indonesia, and it's equal to 19,000 reef stars or 280,000 corals, which is huge. So that's where we come to the next part of like, okay, so we've worked out, we found something that works. Where do we go from here? So at the moment, we are currently in Indonesia. That's where our main site is. We're also working with the national parks in Indonesia, which is really exciting to help work with those guys on helping their own marine parks. We also work with a tourism operator in Bali. And we're also over in the Mesoamerican reef in Scalak with a group called Oceanus. The idea is that we will be trialling this technique in all different kinds of reefs around the world to be able to check that it actually can work in different ecological environments. And it might also be for a different objective. What can you all do at home to help? Well, if you can't access a reef, if you might be like Joe and stuck in Canada and it's really cold and you can't go and help a reef, there are lots of other options you can do. You can learn more about the oceans, learn as much as you can to understand what the driving forces are behind oceans. Some of it is really sad and upsetting, but there is, as I'm trying to tell you, there is some hope here. It's not going to fix everything, but the idea is that if we can restore those little areas that are really important, that help seed other coral reefs, we're helping restart that process. The other part is to spread the word. Talk to your friends, talk to your family. An example I've got is of a lady over here in Cairns. Her name is Molly Steer. She was 9 years old when she decided that she was going to stop people from using plastic straws here in Cairns. She's now got this huge following here in Cairns. All the restaurants and bars don't use plastic straws anymore, and it's now expanded across Australia as well. So if you think that you can't do anything because you're just one person, that's not true. The other part is to go to your local marine area if you're nearby the ocean. Become involved, do some cleanups. And to be honest, the other cool part, it still goes back to my roots, which is reduce, reuse, recycle. If you can have a water bottle, use it rather than try and get single-use plastics. That is it.
All right. Well, first of all, Alicia, thank you for an awesome presentation. You've had quite the ocean adventures that's brought you to Mars. And, I still keep thinking about that first picture you showed us of how healthy and beautiful a recovered reef can look.
Really, I can go back to it if you like.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's go back one more time.
Let's do that.
Beautiful. All right. Yeah, I mean, you fish on it, colorful. I can imagine it looks nothing like it did initially when the stars were first laid down. So it's
That's correct.
amazing work. All right. Well, Alicia, let's get you to come back from that screen share and get you nice and front and center for a little Q&A action.
Sure. Here we go.
All right. So those who are tuning in live via YouTube, there's the chat sidebar on the right. Send us in some questions there and we'll work some of those in. But to get us started, I'm really curious about the behind the scenes before those first stars were ever put into the ocean. Can you tell us a little bit about the design process, behind the scenes before it was ready?
So when the guys in Indonesia, Noel, one of my colleagues, helped build these to begin with, he actually looked at what else was available already around the world in reef restoration and tried all different techniques. So we tried different things where you can put electric currents through steel and all sorts of different things, concrete. And they came to this idea, which is a mix of two different techniques. So one of them is from the Maldives, where they have these quite large structures of about 1 meter high, and they sit on the sand there and they have lots of different corals that grow up along the side. And so he thought this is a really cool idea, but maybe we make it a bit shorter and that might help with holding down what we had in Indonesia, which is the rubble. The other idea was about about coating them. So rather than just putting steel in the water, it seemed to be that the coral really liked having a hard, rough sort of substrate to be able to attach to, which is a bit similar like a rock. And so they then tried a few different techniques and came to this almost like a shell grip, which they attach with the resin to the steel. That also helps the steel last a bit longer as well, which helps.
All right. So looking at the process when you put them into the water, it looks like you don't really anchor them to the bottom. Is it the weight plus kind of having the other ones around? It's enough to keep it nice and down on the bottom?
A little bit. So there's one bit that I've probably missed in one of those videos, which is the fact that we do anchor them down. Okay. Back in the beginning, when we first started trialing this on one of the islands, they never used to. We used to just attach them and tie them really, really tightly. And so they're quite strong together. But then when there was a big storm, a big wave came underneath and lifted them all up and rolled them up like a carpet. So we learned from that. And now we use stainless steel stakes, and they're almost attached on a 45-degree angle into the side. And that stops the reef star from coming up. So we do them all around the edge of the builds that we're working on. We've had a few big storms, especially recently. One in Bali that had 6 meters swell, and it completely smashed some of the tourism pontoons, but the reef stars stayed down and actually helped with the coral, allowed some of the coral, broken coral to sort of fill in.
Okay, yeah, that's awesome. So I also really enjoyed the images you showed after a year, the recovery after a year. Have you done much work to look at if it's just the coral that initially started, or are you seeing other coral that maybe, spawned and then attached to those reef stars?
We don't normally see it in the first year, to be honest. And maybe that might just be because of the some of the scientific work that we've done. We haven't really got in that close. And so that is something they're actually started to do this year. We've actually even got underwater magnifying glasses to look for the corals, the little coral babies that you can see on the reef stars. But we have noticed that after 12 months, probably between the 18 months to 2 years mark, is where you start to see things starting to grow even on the reef stars and underneath them. And so you're noticing that all the rubble that was underneath and was moving around a lot has stopped doing that. There's something that's called crustose coralline algae that comes in and just sort of coats all of the rubble. and keeps it all in one place. And that allows then the natural coral to colonize.
All right. So I'm interested as well in the depth. Are you just kind of trialing this in kind of shallow water areas, or do you think this is something that could work at deeper depth?
So at the moment, this one, our main site in Indonesia, the one in Spimonde, that's around the 3 to 5 meter depth. In Bali, we have a site which goes down to 8 meters depth. And then we're also doing some work with University of Hasanuddin, which is in Indonesia. A site in Wakatobi, we've got, I think, down as far as 15 meters, 12 to 15 meters. So we're trying to look at different things. I suppose until now, probably until about 3 years ago, still doing a lot of research and development, trying to work out, does this work, does it not work? And we took it out to the scientific community and also the reef practitioners and said, guys, does this actually work? Do you think this is going to be useful in the restoration toolbox? So it's not the only thing that can be used to restore reefs, but they think that it is one of the good ones that we could use.
Cool. So you may have mentioned this and I just didn't catch it. The origin of the coral. Are there farms in the area that you get them from? Where does the coral come from?
So it depends again on the site. So where we are in Spimonde in Indonesia, we're very lucky that we have a whole range of very healthy coral beds as well. So we normally collect fragments of opportunity. So those are the fragments that have broken off as a result of storms or something that's come past and broken off. We do also collect some from colonies, and we then monitor those to make sure that they've come back and being quite healthy. In areas where there's coral limiting, so such as that site that I mentioned in Wakatobi, where it's a bit deeper, they have got some coral nurseries growing, so almost like a coral garden, trying to grow up those fragments. And that's what I'm going to have here in Australia too quite soon. So hopefully we'll get some reef stars in the water just next week. Again, we're going to be using fragments of opportunity, but the plan is down the track to actually be growing corals to put on the reef stars as well.
Yeah, and this test site in Australia, how big of a project is that going to be? How many reef stars are you hoping to put down?
Nowhere near as big as what we're used to. So in a normal building in Indonesia, it would be somewhere between 500 to 600 across those couple of days.
Yeah.
Here we're looking at 50.
Okay.
So a little bit more than what we're used to, but still quite a big, exciting project for what we've got in Australia, because it's the first time we're going to have reef stars in the water here in Australia.
Sure, and it's a test to see if something that worked in another spot could work.
Absolutely, and it would be about site stewardship for us as well. So the tourism operators, the people that you go out to the reef to have a look at them, they need to make sure that their sites are looked after so they can be there for years and years ahead. So it's about helping those guys have something else to talk about as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So, as someone who lives in the area, can you tell those tuning in and those who will catch the live recording a little bit what the state of the reef is like in Australia?
Well, actually, I was only out there 2 weeks ago and it's looking really good. So you might have heard recently that there was a bleaching event in 2020, and I think that's probably the third in 5 years. So everyone was really, really worried about it. The thing is with bleaching though, that it can be really specific to what's going on in different parts of the reef. So for example, the area that we wanted to do this restoration in, it got really badly bleached as a result just a few months ago. But because we had some changes in the weather patterns, so the water was only hot for a couple of weeks, the coral bleached, but then it's brought back its algae, its zooxanthellae. So I was able to watch that happen, which is quite amazing to go out over a few trips to see coral that's completely white to then come back to be what it was beforehand. So it can happen, and it does happen, as long as the coral hasn't been stressed too much. That was in my site, but then literally only 50 meters away, there were areas that were still amazing and had no coral bleaching whatsoever. So it really does also affect on what we call the hydrodynamics, so those currents that move through the reef as well.
Yeah. So some tuning in might not know about that symbiotic relationship that coral does have with the algae, with the zooxanthellae, and that there is a period of time after bleaching where the coral can still survive. In your experience, what is that kind of time frame?
Well, it really depends on the species and a few other things. So if it's already stressed, it might get a disease, which makes it's almost like us if we've got a cold. and you've already got some other things going on, and it makes you might have to go to hospital, for example. Although unfortunately the corals don't have a hospital to go to. So it really depends. Some of them it's a couple of weeks, but it can't be much more than around a month.
All right. And then with the new project you have on the go now, where could people go if they wanted to track the progress? Is there a spot?
Well, at the moment we have some information recently to celebrate World Oceans Day, which is on our mars.com website. There is another website coming, which we will be able to share with you very shortly, but it's just not ready yet. And we will have a link from our mars.com website where I can show everyone where you're going.
All right. Well, Alicia, first of all, huge thank you for staying up to spend a little time with us. This
No
ocean, it's an absolutely amazing project, and the results. I mean, you can't argue with the results. Those images from a year, from several years on, it's incredible to see how quickly, again, we hear time and time again that our ocean is resilient, and if we give it some space, help out where we can, it can recover quite amazingly. So I really appreciate the work you're doing, with Mars Sustainable Solutions. Sounds like it's a small team, but it's global and it's doing some incredible things.
Yeah, great. Thanks, everyone.
All right. Well, again, everyone, thanks for joining in. Alicia, thank you so much. And we are going to sign off for today. Thanks,
No
everyone.
worries. Cheers.